Hi guys, it's Lizzie. Welcome back to another sewing tutorial. Today we're gonna making the Bella asymmetric off shoulder dress. It's got some gathers on the side, long bell sleeves, and an elegant slit that cuts slightly in the front. There are a few variations, the midi length, or even a top version. There's an invisible zipper on the side, which is probably the trickiest part for beginner, but the rest of it is super easy. Oh, and if you're doing the mini length version, there's no slit, and you can totally choose to make it with or without sleeves. So, enough talking, let's get started. Once you cut out the fabric, you should have one piece for the front, one for the back, two pieces for the sleeves, and don't forget to cut one bias tape for the neckline finishing. First thing first, we need to stabilize the neckline since it's cut slightly on the bias, which means it could stretch out while sewing and mess with our final look. I'm using interfacing tape here. I just measure the exact length of the front and back necklines and cut the tape to match. And I'm also gonna stabilize the zipper placement just to make sure that this area gonna stay stable too. Now take the tape and place it on the wrong side of the fabric. Press it on with a medium heat to glue the tape on the fabric. Alright, starting with the back piece. Place it wrong side up and then fold the back dot at the center line. Pin through both dot legs, making sure that everything is lined up nicely. Bring it to the sewing machine. We're gonna start to sew right at the middle. So the widest part of the dot, we're gonna sew a straight line to the end of the dot, and then leave a 10 cm thread tail and tie it off with a few knots to finish it up. Then come back to the widest part of the dot and finish the other side. After that, press the dot towards the side seam so it lays nice and flat. Now moving on to the front, you'll find two notches where the gathers should start and end. We're gonna sew two parallel stitches with the longest stitch length setting on your machine. First stitch will be 0.5 cm from the edge and the second will be 0.5 from the first. Don't backstitch here because we're gonna pulling the threads to create gathers later. Take the two upper threads and then gently pull to create those gathers. Keep pulling from both sides until the gather section matches with the distance between the notches on the back piece. With the right sides of the front and back piece touching, pin the gathers in place and make sure that they evenly distributed. Then align and pin the rest of the side seam until you reach the slit notch. We're gonna run a straight stitch at 1 cm seam allowance, stopping at the slit notch, and then we serge the seam allowance. But when you are about 2 cm from the slit notch, stop and then shift the upper layer to the side before continuing to serge to the notch. Now let's head over to the ironing board and prep the slit. We're gonna fold the edge to the wrong side of the fabric by 0.5 cm and then press to create a crease. When you get to the slit starting point, gradually reduce the fold a little bit. Then fold it again by 0.5 cm and then press again. At the slit point, overlap the longer serge seam over the shorter one so you cannot see the unserged one, you know. Then sew a straight stitch at 0.3 cm seam allowance to secure the slit. And when you reach to the slit point, rotate the garment 90 degrees and sew a few stitches here to reinforce this corner. Lift the presser foot and rotate the garment to 90 degrees again to continue to sew the other side of the slit. Heat is on the wrong side and the right side. Then press everything nicely. Okay, now we're gonna serge the shoulder seams, the right side seams separately, front and back, and the sleeve seams, but leave the armhole unserged for now. With the right sides of the front and the back piece touch each other, we're gonna sew this part under the right armhole. There should be a notch to indicate where the zipper starts and the stitch should stop right there. And then we're onto the invisible zipper installation. First, we're gonna prep the zipper by pressing the coils away from the tape to make the stitching easier later. With the gammon right side facing up, let's start on the back piece first. The plastic zipper head should line up with the end of the small seam under the armhole that we just sewn. Place the zipper face down on the fabric. Pin the zipper into the gammon until you reach the notch indicating the end of the zipper placement, and bringing it to the sewing machine to do a basting stitch with the longest stitch length. You can just pin to keep the zipper tape in place at this step, but I found doing a basting stitch is much more accurate. Next, zip up the zipper and with the right sides together, pin the other side of the zipper to the front piece edge. Be careful to line up everything nicely here to run another basting stitch on this side. The purpose of the basting stitch is to check if everything matches well. There's no bumps and looms before sewing the zipper in permanently. Okay, it looks pretty good. Now we're gonna switch to a proper invisible zipper foot to sew the zipper in. After checking that the zipper is well applied, we need to sew the rest of the seam below the zipper. I like to start at the hem and then walk all the way up and it right at the point where the zipper seam ends to ensure a continuous seam. Then we're gonna press the seam open. My zipper is a bit too long, so I'm gonna cut it and leave around 2 cm below where the zipper ends. Next up, let's sew the shoulder seams. So with the right sides together, we're gonna sew the front and the back piece together at 1 cm seam allowance, and then we press the seams open. For the sleeves, you notice that they are asymmetrical. The shorter sleeve goes to the gather side and the longer sleeves go to the zipper side. We're gonna sew the sleeve seams at 1 cm seam allowance and then press them open and get ready to attach them. In order to attach the sleeve to the bodice, we're gonna turn the gammon inside out, but keep the sleeves right side out. Put the sleeve into the gammon and then match the armhole edge on the sleeve with the armhole edge on the bodice. The sleeve seam should be aligned with the underarm point. Pin around the armhole to keep the 2 layers in place and then repeat for the other sleeve. Then head to the sewing machine and sew around the armholes at 1 cm seam allowance. Then serge all around the seams. This step will be the last one that we need to use the serger, so you can tidy it after the steps. Carefully press the armhole seam towards the sleeves. Next, we're gonna use the bias binding method to finish up the neckline edge. Grab your neckline bias strip and align the 2 short ends with the right sides together. Then sew them at a 1 cm seam allowance to create a loop. Press the seam open and trim the seam allowance down so it's nice and small. With the right sides facing each other, align the binding raw edge with the neckline edge and pin them together around the neckline. Add as much pin as you need to keep it in place. Then head to the sewing machine to stitch with a 0.5 cm seam allowance. After that, wrap the binding over the seam allowance and with the right sides facing up, understitch the seam allowance to the binding, making sure that you catch the seam allowance underneath. Trim the excess seam allowance as close to the stitching lines as possible. Fold the binding into the inside of the dress and then stitch at 0.5 cm all around the neckline. And there you go, a clean and professional looking neckline finish. Okay, we've almost done. All that's left is the hemline and the sleeve hem. For this, we're gonna do tiny round hem, also called as baby hem. So in order to do the baby hem, we're gonna fold the fabric edge towards the wrong side by 1 cm and then make a tiny top stitch about 2 to 3 mm from the folded edge. Then trim the excess seam allowance as close to the stitching line as possible. And roll the hem up again to the wrong side to create the tiny fold. With your wrong hem facing you, we're gonna stitch another straight line directly on top of the first one. Then I'm gonna use exactly the same technique to finish the sleeve hem too. And you are done! The full dress is now ready to slay! The assembly process is pretty straightforward, and honestly I think the zipper is the only thing that can be challenging for beginners. But I hope you will like this dress enough to give it a shot. And don't forget to tag me at Lizzie Pattern because I would love to see your versions. If you like this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up because it is the easiest way to support your favorite creator for free. And yes, thank you guys so much for watching. I see you in the next video. Bye!